"Sir, what in the hell is that supposed to be?" The voice cut through the humid South Carolina air, sharp and arrogant. It belonged to a Marine colonel, a man whose uniform was so crisp it looked like it could cut paper. His name, Matheson, was stitched in neat block letters above his right pocket, just below a modest rack of peacetime ribbons. He was pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the object in the old man's hands. The old man, who couldn't have been a day under 75, looked down at the camera he was holding. It was a Nikon F, a relic from a bygone era. The black enamel was worn down to the brass on every edge, the leatherette peeling near the film advance lever. Its lens was a long, heavy piece of glass and steel that made the whole apparatus look more like a piece of field artillery than a photographic tool. He didn't answer immediately. His movements were slow, deliberate, as he adjusted the aperture ring with a faint, satisfying click. His hands were a roadmap of a hard life, gnarled and scarred, yet they handled the ancient camera with a surgeon's gentleness. "This is a restricted area for credentialed press and official-base photographers," Colonel Matheson continued, his voice rising in volume, clearly performing for the junior Marines and proud families milling about the Parris Island parade deck. "And that antique does not grant you a credential. So I'm going to have to ask you to move along, Grandpa." The old man finally looked up. His eyes were the color of a faded sky, pale blue and watery, but they held a sharpness that was startling. They swept over the colonel, taking in the polished insignia, the confident posture, the slight sheen of sweat on his brow. The eyes of a man who missed nothing. "My grandson is graduating," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble with a hint of a Midwestern drawl. "I'm just here to take his picture." "With that museum piece?" Matheson scoffed, letting out a short, barking laugh. A few of the younger Marines nearby shuffled their feet uncomfortably. "Look, Pops, we have professionals for that. High-res digital, 4K video. We're creating a modern, streamlined image for the Corps. We can't have this cluttering up the official shots." He waved a dismissive hand at the old man's simple attire. A plain khaki jacket, worn jeans, and comfortable-looking boots that had seen better decades. The old man simply nodded, his expression unreadable. He held up a laminated ID card, its edges softened and yellowed with age. The photo was of a much younger man with the same piercing eyes, but the card was clearly official. "It's still valid," he stated, not as a challenge, but as a simple fact. Colonel Matheson snatched the card. He squinted at it, his lip curling in disbelief. "Base access for retired personnel doesn't mean you can set up your own little photo booth wherever you please. This isn't a flea market." He handed the card back with a flick of his wrist. "Now, I'm not going to ask you again. Clear the area. Go sit in the bleachers with the other families." A young Lance Corporal named Evans, tasked with crowd control, watched the exchange from a dozen yards away. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. There was something profoundly wrong about this. It wasn't just the disrespect, which was galling enough, but the old man's reaction to it. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He just was. He stood there with a kind of rooted stillness, like an old oak tree that had weathered 1,000 storms and found this particular gust of wind to be of little consequence. Matheson, emboldened by the old man's silence, took a step closer, invading his personal space. "Are you deaf, old-timer? I gave you a lawful order. On my parade deck. I served," the old man said quietly, his voice carrying no trace of pride or complaint. It was just a statement. "Oh, I'm sure you did," Matheson sneered. "We all appreciate your service in the Great War, or whichever one it was. But the rules are different now. We use technology. We have protocols. Things you wouldn't understand." He gestured at his own aide, who was filming B-roll on a state-of-the-art digital cinema camera. "That's how we do it in the 21st century Marine Corps. Not with junk." He poked the old Nikon's lens with his finger, leaving a smudge on the glass. The old man's calm finally fractured, but only for a second. His pale blue eyes hardened into chips of ice. His hand, the one not holding the camera, clenched into a fist at his side. The knuckles were white and ridged like ancient stone. Then, as quickly as it came, the flicker of intensity was gone, replaced by that same unnerving patience. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a soft lens cloth, methodically wiping away the colonel's fingerprint. Lance Corporal Evans saw it all. He saw the flash in the eyes. He saw the fist. and he saw something else. On the lapel of the old man's worn jacket was a small, tarnished pin he hadn't noticed before. It was a simple gold pin, a tiny scuba diver, a UDT badge, but there was something else with it, almost hidden in the folds. It looked like a skull with crossed anchors behind it. It wasn't standard issue. It was something old, something that tickled a memory from a history class at the School of Infantry, a brief on the forerunners of MARSOC. Force reconnaissance. Matheson was now losing his temper. The old man's placid refusal to be provoked was more infuriating than any argument would have been. That's it. I'm revoking your base access. Give me that ID. He reached for the old man's jacket. The instant the colonel's fingers touched the fabric, the old man moved. It wasn't fast, but it was economical, a slight shift of his weight, a subtle turn of his shoulder. Matheson's hand found nothing but air. For a man his age, his balance and spatial awareness were preternatural. "Don't touch me," the old man said. The words were still quiet, but they resonated with a cold authority that made the air feel heavy. That was enough for Evans. His moral compass was screaming. This wasn't just an arrogant officer being a jerk. This was a violation of everything the Corps was supposed to stand for. Honor, courage, commitment, respect. He discreetly pulled out his personal cell phone, his back to the confrontation. His hands were sweating as he scrolled through his contacts. There was one person he could call, a man who had been his primary marksmanship instructor and had taken a liking to him, Master Gunnery Sergeant Reyes. A man who had been in the Corps for nearly 30 years and knew everything and everyone. It was a huge risk, calling a master guns on his personal phone about a colonel, but the knot in his stomach said the bigger risk was doing nothing. Reyes answered on the second ring, his voice a gravelly bark. "Evans, this better be good." "Master Guns," Evans whispered, trying to shield the phone with his body. "Sorry to bother you, sir. I'm on the parade deck at Parris Island. There's a colonel, a guy named Matheson, and he's harassing an old veteran." "Define harassing," Reyes grunted, the sound of paperwork shuffling in the background. "Publicly humiliating him, Master Guns. In front of families. He's calling him Pops and Grandpa, trying to kick him out because he has an old camera. The vet, he's just standing there taking it. But there's something about him, sir. He's wearing an old Force Recon pin, I think. He's calm. Too calm." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "An old man. Force Recon pin. Parris Island graduation. What does he look like, Evans?" 70, maybe older. Weathered face. Pale blue eyes. Gnarled hands. He's holding a real, old Nikon camera. The shuffling of paper stopped. Evans could hear what sounded like a sharp intake of breath. When Reyes spoke again, his voice was tight, urgent, and stripped of all its earlier gruffness. "Evans, listen to me very carefully. What is the old man's name?" "I don't know, Master Guns." The colonel is still yelling at him. "Find out. And do not, under any circumstances, let that colonel lay a hand on him. Stall. Create a distraction. Do whatever you have to do. I don't care if you have to fake a seizure. Keep that man safe. I'm making a call. You have no idea what's happening, son." The line went dead. Evans's blood ran cold. The sheer panic in the Master Gunnery Sergeant's voice was terrifying. He turned back to the scene. Matheson had now called over two of his own junior officers, both lieutenants, who looked deeply uncomfortable. "I want this man escorted off my base. Now, if he resists, detain him." The old man just stood there, holding his camera, his gaze distant. The feel of the cold, brass metal in his hands had triggered something. The bright, humid air of the parade deck dissolved. The crisp blues of the dress uniforms faded to a mottled, suffocating green. The scent of cut grass was replaced by the smell of mud and decay. He wasn't at Parris Island anymore. He was deep in the Aishau Valley, 1969. The Nikon in his hand felt heavier, longer. It was the familiar weight of his M40 rifle. He was lying on his belly in the muck, his eye pressed to a scope, not a viewfinder. His target, a North Vietnamese general, was stepping out of a bunker 1,000 yards away. The world narrowed to the circle of his scope. He controlled his breathing. Without squeeze. The imaginary recoil didn't even make him flinch. He blinked, and the memory vanished. He was back on the parade deck, the arrogant colonel's face just inches from his own. Just as the two lieutenants reluctantly moved to put their hands on the old man, a new sound began to intrude. It was a faint, rhythmic chopping that grew steadily, impossibly louder. Everyone, including Colonel Matheson, looked up. Two sleek, gray UH-1Y Venom helicopters were bearing down on the parade deck at an aggressive speed. They weren't flying to the designated landing zone. They were coming right for the main field, a flagrant violation of every base protocol. The crowd of families pointed and murmured. Marines looked at each other in confusion. Matheson's face was a mask of fury and bewilderment. "What in God's name is this?" he roared to no one in particular. "Who authorized this?" The two gunships didn't land so much as attack the ground, flaring hard at the last second. The rotor wash was a hurricane, sending hats flying and kicking up a cloud of dust and grass clippings that sandblasted everyone. Doors were thrown open before the skids had even fully settled. From the lead helicopter emerged a figure that made every Marine on the field, including Colonel Matheson, freeze in place. He was a tall, imposing man wearing the 4 stars of a full general on his collar. His aide, a nervous-looking major, scrambled out behind him. The general's face was carved from granite, and his eyes were burning with a cold fire that made Matheson's earlier anger look like a child's tantrum. He ignored the saluting, sputtering colonel completely. His gaze swept the scene, past the confused lieutenants, past the stunned families, until it locked onto the old man with the camera. The general's entire demeanor changed. The fury vanished, replaced by a look of profound, almost reverent respect. He strode directly toward the old man, his polished boots sinking slightly into the manicured lawn. He came to a halt 3 feet away, his back ramrod straight. Then, he executed the sharpest, most perfect salute Lance Corporal Evans had ever seen. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated deference from a 4-star general to a civilian in a worn-out jacket. "Master Sergeant Thorne," the general's voice boomed, cutting through the stunned silence. "It is an honor to see you, sir." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Colonel Matheson's jaw dropped, and the color drained from his face. He looked like he'd been shot. "Master Sergeant? Sir?" He stared at the old man, at Master Sergeant Thorne, as if seeing him for the first time. Thorne gave a slow, tired nod, not returning the salute but acknowledging it. "General Morrison, you didn't have to come all this way for me." "The hell I didn't, Gunner," Morrison replied, dropping the salute but not the tone of respect. He then turned, and the full force of his Arctic fury fell upon Colonel Matheson. "Colonel, what is your name?" "M. Matheson, sir." "Colonel James Matheson," he stammered, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "Colonel Matheson," the general began, his voice dangerously low. "Do you have any idea who you were just threatening to arrest? Do you have any concept of the history that is standing right in front of you?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to address the entire assembly, the new Marines, their families, the shell-shocked officers. "This man," he said, pointing to Thorne, "is Master Gunnery Sergeant Elias Thorne, retired. Though men like him are never truly retired. You see these ribbons on my chest?" Morrison gestured to his own impressive collection. "They are pale imitations of the honor this man has earned. He is a recipient of the Medal of Honor." Another wave of shock rippled through the crowd. "The citation is still classified, so I can't tell you exactly what he did to earn it. But I can tell you that he and 3 other men from 1st Force Reconnaissance Company held off an entire enemy battalion for 2 days to protect a downed helicopter crew. He was the last one standing, calling in airstrikes on his own position when reinforcements finally arrived. They found him using his empty rifle as a club, standing over the wounded pilot he had sworn to protect." The general took a breath, his eyes still locked on Matheson. "He also holds the Navy Cross for swimming 3 miles through enemy-infested waters to plant demolition charges on a strategic bridge, and 2 Silver Stars, one for single-handedly taking out 3 machine gun nests in Hue City. He has 5 Purple Hearts. He was one of the founding instructors of what would eventually become MARSOC. The marksmanship techniques he developed in the jungles of Vietnam are still the bedrock of our Scout Sniper program. His call sign was Ghost, because he could move through the densest terrain imaginable without making a sound, and the only evidence he was ever there was the high-value target who never saw the dawn." Morrison stepped toward Matheson, who involuntarily flinched. "You mocked his camera." "This museum piece," the general said, his voice dripping with contempt, "is a Nikon F, modified by Master Sergeant Thorne himself. It has no batteries. It has no electronic signature. On clandestine reconnaissance missions deep behind enemy lines, where a single stray radio frequency emission from a digital camera would get your entire team killed. This is what he used to gather the intelligence that saved hundreds of American lives. He took photos with this camera that changed the course of battles. That smudge you put on his lens is a desecration of a holy relic of this corps. The silence on the parade deck was absolute, broken only by the idling engines of the helicopters. "You, Colonel," the general said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more terrifying than any shout, "who have spent your career managing logistics and polishing your brand image, dared to put your hands on a man who has bled more, sacrificed more, and given more to this nation and this corps than you could possibly comprehend in 1,000 lifetimes. You are an embarrassment. You are a stain on the uniform that men like him made legendary." He turned to his aide. "Major, take Colonel Matheson's command credentials. He is relieved, effective immediately. He will report to my office at the Pentagon on Monday at 0800 to explain why he shouldn't be separated from the service he has so profoundly dishonored." The major nodded grimly, and the now trembling Matheson looked utterly broken. But before the aide could act, a gnarled hand rested gently on the general's forearm. "He's just a boy, Frank," Master Sergeant Thorne said quietly. "Full of piss and vinegar. The corps needs that fire. It just needs to be aimed in the right direction." General Morrison looked from Thorne's calm, forgiving eyes to Matheson's humiliated face. He sighed, the fury draining out of him, replaced by a deep weariness. "He is a colonel, Gunner. He should know better." "Maybe," Thorne said. "Or maybe he just needed to learn. Some lessons are harder than others." He then turned and looked at Matheson, truly looked at him. There was no anger in his gaze, only a deep, profound sadness. "Son, rank doesn't earn you respect. The uniform doesn't earn you respect. Those things only earn you authority. Respect is earned by what you do for the Marine to your left and the Marine to your right." He patted the old Nikon. "This is just a tool. Same as your fancy new cameras. Same as a rifle. The tool doesn't make the man. The man makes the tool." Matheson could only nod, his eyes filled with tears of shame. I am so sorry, Master Sergeant. I had no idea." "That's the point, son," Thorne said gently. "You're not supposed to have an idea. You're just supposed to be respectful. To everyone. You never know whose story you're stepping on." The tension finally broke. General Morrison ordered his helicopters to power down. He walked with Thorne over to the bleachers, where a young Marine with his grandfather's pale blue eyes was waiting, stunned into silence by the proceedings. Thorne ignored the commotion, the whispers, and the stares. He raised his old, battered camera, the focus ring turning smoothly under his practiced fingers. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The shutter clicked, a solid, mechanical sound that echoed with history. He had his picture. As the day wound down, and the story began its rapid journey into Marine Corps legend, Lance Corporal Evans found himself standing near the exit. Master Sergeant Thorne approached him, the general a respectful step behind. "You're the one who made the call, aren't you, son?" Thorne asked. Evans snapped to attention. Yes, Master Sergeant." Thorne smiled. "Good instincts. You saw something wrong, and you did something about it. That's what it's all about. You're going to be a fine Marine." He stuck out his gnarled hand. Evans shook it, feeling the immense strength and history in that grip. The lessons from that day echoed across Parris Island for years. Colonel Matheson wasn't kicked out. At Thorne's personal request, he was reassigned to a wounded warrior battalion, where he spent the next 3 years learning firsthand about the real cost of service and the nature of true strength. They said it changed him completely. And every new recruit heard the story of the ghost of Parris Island and his old camera, a living reminder that the greatest heroes are often the ones you'd never notice, and that respect is a currency you pay to everyone, because you never know when you're standing in the presence of greatness. It's stories like these, passed down from one generation of warriors to the next, that form the true backbone of the Corps. If this story reminds you of the quiet heroes in your own life, make sure you subscribe and share it, so these vital lessons are never forgotten.